We got Jeff Young with me again. How's it going these days? You traveled far these past few days.
Yeah, it's nice to talk to you again. I just got done making the grueling trek from the Gulf Coast of Florida, across southern United States out to my new digs, which is in Woodland Hills, just about 25, 30 minutes north on the 101 of Hollywood. So I really love it out here. It's a great area. I'm really happy. Everything's fallen into a real good vibe right now. So it's a good time for creativity, and a lot of stuff's bouncing around, so that's good.
So you're going to be working in studios and stuff, Jeff?
Yeah, there's a couple studios out here that there was just so many opportunities that keep presenting themselves via Los Angeles for the past few years. I've kind of been, back and forth between Sarasota and the West Coast. Both my daughters and my primary vocalist Twinkle's back on the Gulf Coast, but a lot of the opportunities, present themselves out here. And I was out here teaching at MI for a couple of years, 2008 and before, and I just kind of keep getting called out this direction, and so here we go again. And I have met a couple great guys. There's one analog studio, which I'm kind of more interested in doing this album totally analog, at least as much as possible, because I've done a lot of recording digitally, and there's a lot of arguments back and forth, but some of the best tracks on even Equilibrium, my album, were analog, the stuff that we did analog. Like if I'm just comparing, say, an analog recorded classical guitar versus a digital. So I have one studio that's analog and another contact that has a studio that's digital. Plus, on my laptop, I have the Nuendo 4 system, which is basically a full, 48-track and beyond recording studio right on your laptop. So I have a studio in my casa here that I'm setting up as we speak. So they'll be recording in all three places, maybe even a little back in Florida, but most of it will probably be done out here.
So Jeff, what do you think of laptop recordings, compared to everything else out there? Does it do the job good?
You can listen to Seasons of Wither off my album, because that, even though it's just myself and Twinkle in my living room, and that was recorded back in Sarasota, Florida, in my house back there, that was all done on my laptop. I mean, it doesn't really, that's not where you're storing the digital information. Doesn't really, it's not that, whether you're storing it in a huge $1 million studio or on your hard drives in your home. It's digital information being stored. So as long as it's more the recording techniques. I think it's kind of how you mic everything and what room you put stuff in and how big the room is, what padding or acoustics or soundproofing you use, if any, treatments to the walls, things like that.
Now, do you have specific microphones that you still have in your collection and all that for recording, let's say?
Yeah, there's a couple I like to use. One that I'd say is probably most obscure, so would probably be most interesting for listeners to hear about, would be the Soundfield has a microphone, and it's actually if you go to Soundfield, just Google Soundfield, they have a microphone that's actually 4 capsules. It's actually 4 mics within one microphone. So imagine when you record one pass, say, let's just take it from a basic perspective so it's easy to understand. Say you're sitting there doing a basic acoustic guitar track.
Mm-hmm.
you have the microphone, and this was used on Seasons of Wither. Again, you can hear it was one of 3 microphones I used. One microphone, and it looks like it's a condenser mic until you get to the end, and it has 4 microphones pointing out in different directions, right? And then when you record, each microphone in that capsule is going to a different track, okay? And you can actually, this is one of the microphones that you can get true 5.1 recording, true surround sound, because you can set things around the microphone. You could set up in a circle around the mic and record an acoustic group, for an example. It's great for live recording applications, because it records the room and everything, all the bouncing. And so the Soundfield mic, it's amazing. You can actually, the cool thing is once you record the stuff and once everything's on tape, because each microphone is in a different location, kind of, if you look at the geography of the guitar, later on, once it's recorded, via the software that you have, and there's actually a more expensive version of this microphone that's a 2-rack space version of this, you can go and actually change the placement of the microphone after it's been recorded. So say it was like not close enough to the neck, or you want it more towards the sound hole or the vent of the guitar, you can change it after the fact by blending, by how you blend the different channels. So it's really, that's an amazing mic. I use that. I use a Sheps that I've been using since I did Baji's album. I've had that over a decade. We used on Chameleon. I used that also on Equilibrium, and we'll be using on stuff again, and just a few choice microphones. And then usually if we need extra stuff, we'll rent it, or the studios that we'll be using, because we want to go analog and I don't have an analog machine, they'll have the microphones provided for the new recording.
Wow. And Jeff, what's this new project going to be called?
Well, I don't know about the name, or if it's just going to be, it's actually kind of 2 projects running parallel. And, it's kind of, looking at the recording industry and responding to how the industry is evolving and changing. We musicians, our record companies are obsolete and becoming more so and more so each day. And because Apple and iTunes is responsible for over 90% of all, record sales in the world, if you think about that, that's mind-blowing. Mm-hmm. It's driven the market kind of full circle back to how it used to be in the Sun record days and the 50s, and when Elvis and, even artists even before the Beatles, were, it's more of a singles-driven market as opposed to an album-driven market. And a lot of bands in LA and a lot of bands and artists and folks that I've been talking to are kind of gearing their releases more towards based around a single and really releasing strong songs, or even a 4-song EP, 4 or 5 song or less. Because again, the audience, combined with, the fact that it's more of a singles market in the way music's evolving away from a major label mindset and more to an indie mindset, because people can record in their homes now and get recordings that sound as good and better than what they can get in major studios. So it's changing the whole game. So part of it is, the iTunes, and part of it is, because the market is being driven, away from a major label mindset, artists are going to be more creative, and we're going to do it ourselves. And so what I'm kind of gearing my plan more towards is releasing, like, every couple 2-3 months, 1 song, and it'll be either, a solo piece, and I have a lot of solo piece, more, compositions. There's a few pieces I've learned by Sergio Saab that I'll be recording and releasing, more using the guitar as an orchestra, kind of playing all the parts, using the guitar as a solo instrument, or using the guitar with loops, or multi-tracking the guitar, and doing more kind of a solo approach. and I'll be releasing a track like that maybe every 2-3 months once I get going. And the cool thing is you can go in the studio and record 2, 3, 4 at a time, and then release a song every 2 months. So you're always ahead of the game as an artist, and the audience doesn't have to digest a whole album, because that's the other thing that's driven the market a little different, is the attention span, because there's so much in the media. There's so much competition for listeners' mind time, be it video games and other distractions, and just a general movement away from people just actually sitting down and listening. Like stop talking and listening to music. It kind of, I think artists are we're figuring out a way that they can digest it. If you just give them a track and you make it a great track, and they don't have to decipher through the entire album and find out what's the song they like, and what's the filler. You just put everything into every song, and you put out, a song every 2-3 months, and you build the story around that, whether you're going to do a video or you're just going to promote it, via radio or whatever format you're going to promote it. So that's kind of one half of it, is I'll be doing some solo releases along with that and interspersed with that, and it's just, there'll be no rhyme or reason. It's just whichever songs present themselves first. Twinkle, my singer, that, again, she sang on Seasons of Wither on Equilibrium, and she's just a great talent, and, one of those diamonds in the rough that has a great backstory. We'll be releasing songs as well, and more along kind of electric related. There'll be some acoustic stuff, but bluesy, heavy, but non-generic. If you can imagine, like Badlands, Joplin, Zeppelin, Soundgarden,
all good stuff.
Pantera, all that stuff, kind of thrown in a blender. Because see, Twinkle's story, this is her story, and it's kind of interesting, and we have a similar story, and that's, I think I've worked with a lot of different musicians over the past, kind of decade, 2 decades, and collaborated with a lot of different artists, and as I get older and wiser, kind of honing it down to, again, I really like playing solo music and solo guitar, and compositions where you can really just hear all the counterpoint of the guitar, but I also like doing vocal music and playing electric guitar. And on Equilibrium, there's 5 female singers and 2 male singers, and everyone amazing in their own right. But Twinkle and I had a vibe, and you can kind of hear it. If on my MySpace, we just did a live radio thing. She has a radio show in Florida. And without rehearsing, we hadn't played Seasons of Wither pretty much since we did a couple live gigs out in L.A. a year ago. But we hadn't played it or rehearsed it, and I went in and we played it, and it reminded me of that response between a singer and a guitar player. And for some reason, when we sit down and play, she is intuitive to the way I play guitar, and she responds, because I don't just play straight, strummy chords. I play counterpoint and a lot of rhythmic stuff, and to have a singer that can respond to that and improv around it and be really intuitive, and you can kind of hear it on that MySpace track. I mean, even it's on the radio and the mic, the engineer in the studio, the mic distorts a little when she sings loud, so it's the recording's a little bit raw, but it doesn't matter. You can hear, for me, that's what's important, and that's what I want to experience when and if I play with other folks, besides doing solo stuff. And we just have a great connection. Her backstory is kind of neat, because in '91, which is just, after I left Megadeth, she, and I think to this day, it kind of stands as a record, as the artist for Warner Brothers Records, female solo artist that got the biggest solo deal. And at the time, they were considering between her and Mariah Carey.
Wow.
And they passed on Mariah Carey, and they signed Twinkle, and which is why Mariah Carey eventually ended up on Sony, and the rest is history with her story. She married Tommy Mottola, who was the president of Sony, and if she would have signed to Warner Brothers, her story would have been totally different. But Warner Brothers ended up signing Twinkle, and she did an album with a pretty renowned producer, Patrick Leonard. He's written a lot of songs. They kind of cast her in a Bonnie Raitt light, which isn't really her vibe. She's a lot more influenced by Paul Rodgers, is probably her number one guy from Bad Company. She's even performed with him. A lot of people say she reminds him of Janis Joplin, and I think it's more in her vibe and presentation and the organicness of her voice. I don't think her voice really sounds like Janis, but every interview that you read or anyone that talks about her kind of compares her to Janis, so I would guess that's a compliment. But Mo Austin and Michael Austin were just in love with her, and so she recorded the album, and it's just one of those horrible stories, and I experienced it with Baji. When the Time Warner merger went down with Warner Brothers, and we, a lot of people, we have Time Cable, and our internet and cable out in LA is Time Warner. Mm-hmm. When that merger went down, a lot of people lost their jobs, and there was a shakeup at Warner Brothers, and her album got lost in that shakeup. It was actually, you can kind of find some stuff online. It wasn't released under her name. It was released under her real birth name. Twinkle's a nickname she's gone by since childhood. Chazelle, Schascle, and the album was called Haunted by Real Life. And it's a killer album for the time and for what it was, and it's just one of those albums that got lost. A similar thing happened with Baji and myself around 97 when Chameleon was released, just about a decade after So Far So Good So What. And the very week that Chameleon was released, we were doing a press conference in Amsterdam about our European tour. And right after it, the guy took us backstage, our European contact, A&R person took us back and said, Seagram's Whiskey just bought Polygram Records, Universal, Motion Pictures, and I don't know what that means, but it's going to be scary. And as a result, in America, 3,000 people alone just from Polygram and the labels in America, the subsidiaries and everyone connected. And that affected a lot of artists, not just Baji and myself, but U2 and, the Bob Marley catalog and Island Records and A&M Records and, so many different bands. Were affected, and that kind of, Twinkle and I have that common story via two different labels, her with Warner Brothers and the Time Warner, merger, and myself and the thing with Baji and our album with, Polygram and Seagram's buyout. And it's a too common story that happens with a lot of artists, especially, it's kind of changing because, again, record labels are kind of obsolete, so these kind of stories aren't going to be as prevalent. But Twinkle and myself were two folks that got caught up in that. And, so for us doing this project together is kind of our path back from, having to deal with the major labels and those conglomerations and, how the business part of music affects the art, if that makes sense.
And business is really important in music. It's not for kids today. They barely play guitar. They have to go on the internet and work their, whole life to develop something on the internet.
Yeah, and in this interview, even though I'm talking about my project, that's hopefully I can bring a little bit of through the stories that I'm telling, and again, kind of how the market's changing. Maybe give some people ideas. How to market and share their own music. Because, if you think about, the plan that Twinkle and I are approaching right now, it makes sense. Go in the studio. It's not as much money. Instead of trying to bite off more than, if you got a Tommy in you got an Operation Mindcrime or a Day at the Races or a Night at the Opera, by all means do an album, right?
Right.
But why not concentrate, Twinkle and I right now, we're writing 10, 15 songs, And we've been working on this project for a year. This has been in the planning stages since we had done some touring out here in Los Angeles exactly a year ago, and we're right on schedule that within a year, we'd be back out here, living out here and working out here. And it was, I think, August 27th last year we made that kind of deal with each other, and I'm here a year later. But if you think about the plan, write 10, 15 songs, pick your best 3 or 4, record them in whatever means, whether that's in your home studio, a big-time studio, your buddy's studio, whatever you have to do. Then you've got a little, back catalog. You got 4 or 5 songs, and you don't even have to mix them all at once. Whichever one you think would be the best, your strongest first release, put it out. Work it for 2 months, whether that means make a video, work radio, work the internet, whatever that means. We all know what those steps are, for musicians working with, the power of the internet and home recording. So work it, let everyone enjoy it, get it out to as many people, then right as that's kind of the story of that song's dying out and the interest, release your next song. And you still got 2 more in the can. And you can kind of mix them as you go, as long as you've got them mixed to release. So, when Twinkle and I go in to record our first, 3, 4 songs, that's going to cover us for half a year. And we'll keep writing, and by the time we have to go in and record again, so it helps the artist because it builds in more time to be creative and write better songs. Instead of trying to write so much, the audience wins because you're not giving them too much to digest. Again, we all know it's a short attention span world. It's all about sound bites, and, it's not like when we grew up and we go to the store and buy Led Zeppelin 3, we'd pick it up off the rack and a big light would appear behind the album, and we'd take it home. We'd read the lyrics, we'd spin, the album cover. That album cover was so cool. Yeah. Or physical graffiti and pull it out and look at all the... It's not like that. People, they buy the CD or they illegally download it and they throw away the CD jacket and stick it in a travel case. They don't read the liner notes. They don't care who produced it, where it was recorded anymore. When we were coming up, we read every detail. I read every thank you. I wanted to know, who's Jimmy Page thanking? What recording studios was it recording? Who did they thank? What equipment did they use? That's how I found out about Lynn Ellsworth and Boogie Bodies, which was my, first good guitar. And he's the guy that actually built the body of the black and white stripe, Van Halen guitar on Van Halen 1 that he found at Charvel, and everyone thought it was a Charvel, which put them on the map, and it wasn't even a Charvel body. That's the ride of that whole thing with Eddie Van Halen, is Eddie put Charvel on the map with that black and white guitar, and it was a Charvel neck, but the body was made by Lynn Ellsworth of Boogie Bodies, which is now Warmoth. So Charvel became huge just because their name was on the headstock. But the body and, the big part of the tone was, and I read that in an interview, Eddie said that it wasn't a Charvel body, and I called information and got Lynn Ellsworth's number and called him, and he built me a Telecaster, semi-hollow, kind of. I was really big into Steve Morse. I didn't want to do a Strat because Eddie had already done that, so he built me a semi-hollow. But the point being, reading liner notes, and we would, we'd soak all that stuff, but it's not that world now. So again, this new kind of business model, and I'm not going to say I invented it. There's a few bands in LA that are doing it. I'm just smart enough to say, I've talked to, the business people I work with, lawyers and, business advisors and stuff, and they're kind of seeing that trend, and I'm seeing a few bands doing it, and I like the way it's working for them. And you're seeing a lot of different, even I read an interview somewhere, Ian Astbury from The Cult is collaborating with a band, Boris, B-O-R-I-S, and they had him come in and they did like a 3 or 4 song EP, and he was basically, I heard an interview with him, and he said the same, he was kind of preaching the same thing, that, pick your best songs, go in, it's a short attention span world. Put those out, focus on that, and then, once you've put 10 songs, then maybe put those all out as an album later for the people who, still get into that format, because I still appreciate, the album format, but it's just not that world today. So that's the immediate plans now, and as soon as, I settle in and work the pieces back up, I would guess a solo piece is going to come out first, and then followed by something by Twinkle and me a couple, 2-3 months later, and then maybe another solo piece, and back and forth, something like that. But for me at this point, it's just about putting out just quality music, and it's never been. I did Megadeth, but so far so good. So it was 87, and 10 years later I did Chameleon, and that was 97. And I think, I'd rather put out, quality and not quantity.
Mm.
And so I'm just going to take my time. I think it's a good model for artists now, because it's more cost effective for us. The audience can appreciate the songs, and there's less of a chance that if you put a good song out there, there's less of a chance of it getting lost in the shuffle. If you really focus on it and make it not only the only thing the audience can hear by you in that 2-month or 3-month time window, that's the only thing really new they can hear, but it's also you can focus on it. So it's like by everyone putting their focus on it, there's less chance if you have a good song that it'll be lost. And there's so much music being released,
And like you said earlier, it's like returning to the beginning of, the Beatles, and that when they released 45s, in a sense, also.
Yeah. And just go back, everything old is new again. Think how they marketed when an Elvis single or a Beatles single. That's how to market a song in this market today. The only advantage, we have a huge advantage, the internet. They didn't have that back then, so that changes all the rules.
Excellent wisdom you've given the audience, Jeff.
I'm here to help, and and that's a cool thing, because I'm excited about it, because it's been frustrating for all of us artists, as we've been kind of feeling like we're in limbo in these past several years since the internet was invented, and Napster and illegal downloading. And the industry has always been based around, business people with no talent taking the money of the people with the talent, right?
Right.
All the way back to when the guy recorded Robert Johnson in a hotel room and figured he could make money off this dumb guitar player, right? So, now it's not like that, and the artists, can finally take back a little bit thanks to the internet, and it's like a double-edged sword, because it took the money out of our pockets on one hand, and that's the crazy thing about the internet. Now people can steal the music, and it's basic off album sales. You're not going to make any money. The place to make money in music right now is by touring and selling merchandise. That's one avenue and one revenue stream. And then the other avenue is through publishing, which is songwriting. Or branding. You see a lot of artists branding and associating their music with products, right?
Right.
Or the image of, a perfume or a line of clothing or Vita Water with 50 Cent, whatever. That's how artists are making money now. It's not through album sales, because people are stealing the music, and there's just not enough. There's not enough money coming in via that. The good thing is, so that's the double-edged sword of the internet, but the upside is from, any artist's home office, home studio, the internet is your 24-hour, your own personal MTV. Everyone says MTV doesn't play music videos anymore. They don't need to, because you have, with MySpace and YouTube, and all the other Facebook and all the other things out there, the artist now has the ability to be their own MTV, to be their own TV channel with YouTube, just like what you do. You're going to take this interview and you're going to put it on YouTube.
That is true.
Anyone in the world can sidle right up and listen to it. or not listen to it. So I mean, we're living in the greatest time for musicians, and it's the best and it's the worst of times, you know. But if you go into it knowing with a business model that says, okay, I'm not going to make money off the actual sales of the CD. I mean, you can if you tour and you sell at gigs, because you're printing them yourself, right? And you're selling the CDs. Or even when G and I would tour, Polygram would give us CDs for so much. They'd sell us CDs for a really cheap rate, and we'd sell them at the gigs along with T-shirts and bumper stickers and whatever else. And that's where you make your profit. And it was the same with Megadeth. It doesn't matter whether you're playing speed metal or Brazilian world music. I mean, every week with Megadeth, I'd be getting merchandising checks from T-shirt sales. So that's where it is. And a band thinking about how they can make their image, their logo, their mascot, anything related to the band more saleable on like a T-shirt, you know, coffee mugs, whatever. That's where you're going to make your money. And if you go into that realizing, okay, they're not going to buy the album, they're going to probably steal that, you know, unless they're a down hard loyal fan, you know. And we all buy the bands. Like if Rush puts out an album, I'll buy it. You know, Zeppelin was to put out a new album, but a lot of people aren't going to do that. So, again, put your business model around making one strong song, put it out, work it for 2-3 months, you know, and while you're mixing or perfecting or tweaking the other songs in the background, it's a great way to go, you know. And so that's the future for me, and I'd say that would, and definitely we want to get out there and play and tour. And it may be a little too soon to say, but we got a really cool drummer out here in LA. I don't want to give the name of the band, but I'll hint at it for now, and because we haven't even got together. We're going to get together and start playing. But he's a great kind of John Bonham bluesy drummer from a band that had a couple pretty big hits in the 90s, and everyone would know the band and well. And so it'll be Twinkle, myself, this drummer, and probably hopefully get Lamenzo, maybe Doug Pennick to throw some bass in there.
Wow.
It seems we're lucky. We know a lot of good bass players. So that'll be the core band that does the tracks. And just as a side, that's an interesting thing. On Twinkle's album that she did for Warner, the band that tracked was Toto. It was Steve Lukather, Vaqueros. So her backing band was Toto on her album. I'll send you a copy of it so you can hear it.
I have to hear that. That's interesting.
Yeah. It's
very interesting. Cool. And thank you for the business class, because it was excellent, you know, with Jeff Young. Hydrogyn, what's up with that? We don't see you with Hydrogyn anymore.
For me, that was kind of, again, as I mentioned earlier, Twinkle and I kind of set up a plan a year ago. We spent 21 days touring out here, doing some duo shows, her and I, and also she sat in with the YMT Guitar Trio, who I was playing with, doing some shows with them. And we set this plan into motion that we wanted to do a real hard rock, bluesy, melodic, you know, but with really strong songwriting, because, I mean, I think that's the thing that is mostly missing these days, and originality, you know, stuff that's just not rehashed. So we set this plan in motion exactly a year ago. And again, I just moved out. I've been out here a week, so we're right on track. In the meantime, you know, through all the stuff that blew up in the press with Mustaine, and I'd ended up doing an interview on Westlake and the Pig, and Jeff Westlake is obviously one half of the Hydrogyn team. And I was going to go in and do maybe a song, and it ended up being two, and I ended up going up and tracking some stuff with them, and I guess it wasn't significant enough to spend a lot of time on it, other than to say I could kind of make an analogy. You know, when you're looking for creative and musical endeavors and different stuff to do, it's kind of like when you're dating and you're kind of dating around and hanging out with different people and seeing, you know, if you gel with this person or that person, and just learning from hanging out with different people and sharing experiences. And it was a cool experience, and it was a good way to get my feet wet, to get back into playing electric guitar, a lot, and, getting my electric rig and writing along those lines. But I think ultimately, for me, and I think for James, I think the Hydrogyn prototype, like their sound, is a little more straight ahead. More along the lines of, like bands like, say, AC/DC or Dio tend to have more basic rhythms and the vocals carry it, and there's not a lot of chops-oriented stuff going on. And for me, when you put two members of Megadeth in any band, I don't care if it's Hydrogyn or whatever band, I think if there wasn't that level of playing, that the fans would be really disappointed. And obviously, with both James and I in the project, it was going to attract a lot of Megadeth fans, and I just don't think there was a synergy right there, because their playing styles and songwriting styles is a little more straight ahead, and where I'm coming from, and I think, to have two members of Megadeth in a band, it needs to be more progressive and chops oriented, and that's maybe not the right thing for their sound. I mean, that's their band, and it's not for me to say, and it's not that any way is better than the other. I love AC/DC. I love simple, basic oriented music. I love more riff oriented progressive stuff, but it just ultimately wasn't for me. And it was something that I was willing to do the album, maybe a tour, because Twinkle needed to, her daughter was in school and she was waiting for her to get out so she could be a little more free to go and do what she needs to do. And now she's out, and so now here we are, and we're ready to go. So I think that's all that needs to really be said about that. In every experience you grow, and I came away with 3 cool songs from it that, I walked in. One song that I brought was, I wrote probably 10, 11 years ago with Debbie Holiday, and that got played for some industry folk, and it got a lot of good reviews, so we may do that in another form, either with Twinkle and myself, or maybe Debbie and I, who wrote it with me, will sing it. I don't know, but yeah, onward and upward. And for me, I think I just, at the end of the day, whether it's solo stuff or the stuff I do with Twinkle or any stuff for the future, I just want to, it's got to be, because I think people have kind of heard everything and they're over it, And from teaching at MI and GIT, I saw a lot of kids from all over the world come in. I had a different private lesson 3 days a week, so every hour I saw a different kid, and just got to kind of feel what the younger crowd and what kind of music they get into. And one student could be from Japan, and another one could be from Germany, and one could be from Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And I think kids want something that's innovative and doesn't, they don't mind hearing the influences, but they want something that's interesting to their ears. And for me, I don't think just strumming is going to get it anymore. For me or the audience, there's got to be some thought put into it and some creativity. And I think that's the biggest thing that's lacking in music today, is just craftsmanship. The music is based around a young audience, and the business and the industry likes to get young people when they're dumb and don't understand the business and use them, because they can make a lot of money from them, as opposed to working with older people who are wiser and won't be taken advantage of, right? But the rub there is that young people haven't spent enough time to know how to be craftsmen of songs, and the songwriters, if they get outside songwriting, it always sounds homogenized, right? So, that's kind of what Twinkle and I, that's our goal is, we're seasoned, we've both been around. This is our, last best chance together, because she's the singer I've really been looking for. I've been, since Megadeth, really looking for, Chris Cornell's and Paul Rogers and Janis Joplin's and singers like Twinkle, they don't fall out of the sky every day. And I've played with, probably since I left Megadeth, 30, 40 different vocalists of all different styles. And it's really one of the hardest things, because a lot of people sing, but it's a tough art to really do well. And so I'm really excited, you know, with Twinkle, to have a singer that is really soulful and earthy and just really intuitive. And I'm just excited to get in the studio and create something that, I mean, that's our main mission, is it can't sound, you know, even if it's cool and it sounds like, oh, that sounds like this or that, or it just doesn't have something fresh or new to it. And that's hard to do when you're starting from a blues, you know, based realm, but I think there's still a lot of room left to grow, and it's only if you limit your creativity. So I think at the end of the day, for me, and I think for any listener, that's what, when I read things online or listen to my students talk, it's what everyone's starving for, is just craftsmanship and songwriting, like Queen used to do, like Bohemian Rhapsody is craftsmanship. You know, and no one's ever going to write another song like that. But, I mean, you can name 100 or 1,000 songs that are equally well crafted, right? And that's what we got to get back to as musicians, is really taking the time. And it all falls together with kind of this new model of releasing songs, you know, every 2 months, every 3 months. Craft your songs, and, you know, so that I'm kind of saying it to remind myself. And that's kind of what this interview's been for me, is kind of helping me remind myself, and hopefully other people can take away something from it that might help their quest, whether it's music or whatever. Because I think the principles are the same.
I think what you said, it makes real good sense, and, you know, go and create your 1 to 2 songs really good, and let the rest work on it later on.
And Michael Hedge has had a great saying, and I've said this in a few interviews. I don't know if I said it in our last interview. He's like, any monkey can come up with like a cool riff, or, you know, like a seed of a song. Like, anyone can come up with that. Too often people just like stop with that, and they kind of regurgitate it through the song, and it doesn't morph and it doesn't grow. You know, kind of like the third verse is the same as the first, just a little bit faster, a little bit worse, you know. Whereas, like, why not take the time to really let the song grow and morph, and from the beginning and the end, like a Bohemian Rhapsody or a Stairway to Heaven, or any great song that you name like that morphs and evolves, and it goes through phases and changes, you know. I mean, even Freebird, for crying out loud. I mean, no one wants to hear that again, but if you think of the journey, at least the song took you on a journey, and for its time when it was fresh and when it was new, you know, it was outside the box. And, you know, that was, I'm talking about a little, you know, even more heightened, because I just drove across the country in a U-Haul. So I didn't have Sirius, and all I had was, you know, FM radio. And it's, you know, so I was finding the best rock and, you know, whatever style of music, and it's pretty barren out there. You know, they're either playing classic rock, which is songs we've all heard a lot, and a lot of the new stuff it just doesn't seem very melodic. There doesn't seem to be a lot of counterpoint or craftsmanship in the music. And if we could get back to that, I think, you know, it would help people pay more attention to the music. Maybe that's why the audience isn't listening anymore, is because what the artists are putting out is pretty boring.
I think that's a great interview we just did. 45 good minutes of.
Cool, babe.
And
I hope that was cool for you.
Yeah, I think it's really cool.
It's all stuff I've been thinking about, and, you know, this for me, it's kind of a cool new business model, and the cool thing, it kind of takes the pressure off the artist, if you think about it. It takes the pressure off the artist and the listener. The artist doesn't have to come up with so much, and the listener doesn't have to digest so much. So.
And another thing too, Jeff, this can be an exclusive interview. You didn't talk about this in the other interview, did you?
Nope. You're the first cat that any of this has gone out to.
All right, well that's good. Next episode we'll have to talk about Robert Johnson. You know a lot about him.
Yeah. Yep. And yeah, I'm kind of a musicologist, so I've been soaking it all in, and that's the essence, is to bring all, into your craftsmanship, is to bring everything that you've listened to, from Robert Johnson to Dimebag to Alan Holdsworth to to George Benson. Bring it all in it and throw it in the blender, and you got some originality is going to come out of there somewhere. And by the way, congratulations! I saw you're a fellow Gibson artist now, and that's very cool.
Thank you.
To be so we're family members there.
Awesome.
Yep. I've been playing Gibsons aside from Megadeth. I got my first Gibson Black Beauty, I think, when I was 16, and so that's all I have. I got 2 Flying V's and a Jimmy Page Les Paul, and so for electrics, that's all I touch, and I'm sure you're probably the same. So good. I saw your on your Facebook that you're Gibson now, so congrats on that, and very cool.
Thank you, Jeff.